title of my sermon today is Primed for Grace. Today we wrap up our 3-sermon series on taking the road less traveled. It's based on a cross-country trip that Toby and I took about a month ago through the back roads of New Mexico and Texas and on into Louisiana. If you've been listening, you know that the first sermon was based on the book of Isaiah, where we talked about the importance of taking the road less traveled, a road, for example, that involves standing up and speaking out. The second Sunday, last week, we used the book of Genesis to study the night skies of Big Bend National Park, where we discovered another type of road less traveled, and that is the ability to see past our limited human boundaries into the deeper connections that we all share as humanity. Today, we are going to talk about a third type of road less traveled, a road that many of us fail to take, and that is the road of gratitude and celebration. So I want to start out this morning by sharing a little white lie that I consistently tell all the time, actually. Actually, it's not all the time. It's only when we go out to dinner, but whatever. Okay. So I don't know about you guys, but any of you ever use the app Open Table? Yeah, I see some people raising their hands. Open Table is an app you use to make dinner reservations. And if you have ever used it, you know how it works. You go on this little app, you put in the kind of foods, you find your restaurant you want to go to, and then you put the time, the number of people, the date. But then before you hit OK, it asks you a question. And every time I make this reservation, that's the question you got to answer at the end. Is this an anniversary or a special occasion? And every single time I say yes. The first day of our trip, Toby's like, oh Lord, feel my pain. The first day on our trip, we were eating this tiny little Tex-Mex place in New Mexico, and the waiter came over and immediately announced, happy anniversary! To which Toby was like, what? Okay, so our anniversary is at the end of August. So what? It's the anniversary of our first day of vacation. Next day, same thing. Waitress comes over to a new restaurant. Oh, happy anniversary, y'all. And I was like, well, it's the second anniversary of the first day of our vacation. All right, okay, so it's not technically our anniversary. And no, it's not really a special anniversary or special occasion as defined by Hallmark. But so what? Shouldn't we all try to find as much joy as possible in every single moment of this very short life? Thank you, Karen. Can I have an amen? Thank you. If we have an opportunity to rejoice and be glad, shouldn't we make the psalmist proud and do it? I know it isn't always easy. And sometimes we just don't feel like wallowing in joy. But friends, hear me on this. No matter what place you are in your life right now, there is always something to celebrate. Let's start with just basic shallow tackiness, shall we? There's a website I love called Brownie Locks, Brownie Locks. Have no idea why it's called that, but Brownie Locks offers every imaginable holiday, from the legitimate to the totally wacky, for every month, every week, and every day of the year. So, for example, this month is Adopt a Rescue Rabbit Month. Who knew, right? National Goat Yoga Month. Return shopping carts to the supermarket month. This week is Random Acts of Kindness week, Jello week, and my favorite, Love a Mensch week. Just reading what they say. Today, specifically the 19th of February, the landing at Iwo Jima. The Daytona 500, that's for you, Cheryl. And of course, it's also National Lashes Celebration Day and Chocolate Mint Day. I mean, tell me there's not something always to celebrate. That said, enough kind of fun and games. I'm really not trying to be glib about this. I mean, our world is anything but celebratory these days. I mean, in fact, our music is rather reflective of that today. I mean, it ain't a Dixieland band in our service today, but I think it's more reflective of our reality. Our offertory music and our beautiful anthem, more pensive. They are acknowledging our needs, our fears, our yearnings, which is really more representative of our reality. But that said, even in these places of pain and uncertainty, there is always something to celebrate. You know, I considered this week that I thought about Black History Month, which I think is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Today, we in this country are experiencing generations of deep pain and violence and racial anger. And yet, even in this place of pain, this country pauses every February to mark and celebrate the history and great achievements of African Americans in this country. It doesn't mean the fight is over. It doesn't mean our work is done. It's simply an opportunity to pause and then reflect on the history of a heroic people in order to transform the vision for the road ahead. No matter what's going on, there's always something to celebrate. And of course, the people who know how to celebrate best are the residents of New Orleans, Louisiana. Because in 2 days, they're going to be throwing the party of the century, Mardi Gras, right? In fact, you know, while technically the big party of Mardi Gras is this coming Tuesday, honey, they celebrate all the time. It's not just Mardi Gras. In fact, Toby and I ended our big cross-country drive in New Orleans about a month ago, and even then, they were going strong. Let me share an example. We got there on a Sunday night. On a Monday morning, let me just say again, Monday morning, not Saturday night, not Friday night, Monday morning, we go out for coffee. And here's what we encountered at 7 a.m. on a Monday morning in front of the cafe. Travis, can you show us? There's always something to celebrate. In fact, that spirit of celebration is what many said helped New Orleans come back after Hurricane Katrina. As a writer for NPR said, New Orleans will never be the same, but let it be known that when every man-made levee failed, it was the spirit of La Nouvelle Orleans that prevailed. Celebration is transformation. In our scripture today, the story of the Transfiguration offers us a model. The story is set toward the middle of Jesus' ministry. He had been baptized by John. He was out and had done the Sermon on the Mount. He had performed the feeding of the 5,000. He's been walking through the Galilee with his disciples, healing and teaching. And in this moment, they take a pause. Verse 1. Jesus took with him 6 days later Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. They took a pause. And in that pause, there was a celebration. Moses and Elijah appeared, and then in verse 5, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And from the cloud, a voice said, "This is my son, my beloved. In him I am well pleased." It was God's affirmation. It was God's celebration of Jesus' ministry. So they took a pause. And in that pause, there was a celebration. And in that celebration, there was a transformation. As Jesus was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. In that celebration, there was a transformation. But here's what I find most interesting about this story. Instead of staying there on the mountaintop in the presence of God, honoring Jesus' divine ministry in this dazzling light, the moment quickly passes. The bright cloud fades. Jesus and the disciples walk back down the mountain, and what did they do? They went right back to work. Right back to the Galilee, right back to their ministry, healing and teaching. This is not a story about celebration for celebration's sake. This is a story about celebration as transformation. It's about celebration as re-envisioning. It's about celebration as grace. A few weeks ago, my friend Terry Hershey shared this story with me. In the town of Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, there is a church named Lanyap Presbyterian. The word lanyap being an old Creole word which means something extra. Pastor Gene LaRoe explained it this way. He said, down here, you go into a seafood shop and you order yourself a pound of shrimp, they will put in an extra handful. That's the lanyap. It's something extra you can't pay for. It's something for free, or said in theological terms, it's grace. Pastor Gene went on to say that he began this church in that area devastated by Hurricane Katrina with people who were, as he put it, primed for grace. I love that phrase, primed for grace. I mean, we should all be a people who want to be primed for grace, ready for grace, equipped to go out into the world and share the grace. We should all be a people primed for grace, because by sharing that grace, by celebrating that grace, that's where true transformation happens. This week, our own Barbara Lane, who did the call to worship, shared a story with me that I want to share with you. After spending the night in the city with her mom, Frida, Barbara was walking up walking up First Avenue to hail a cab. And it was cold. It was a cold night, maybe rainy. And she was pulling a heavy suitcase. So, of course, there were no cabs to be had, right? And all of a sudden, Barbara says, a cab pulls over in front of her. And a woman gets out and says, that looks like a really heavy suitcase. Why don't you take my cab? New York City, believe it or not. She didn't know Barbara. It wasn't even her stop. She just chose to celebrate the grace she'd been given, a warm cab on a cold night with someone else who needed it. And here's the thing. That kind of grace, it's contagious. Christina Tosi, who's the chef and founder of Milk Bar here in New York City, recently published a book called Dessert Can Save the World. We all need to go rush out and buy that today. But in it, she says, joy begets joy. Nice begets nice. If you do something lovely and thoughtful for someone, especially when it's unexpected, they'll realize how good it feels, and they'll start doing the same for others. Grace is something to be celebrated because celebration is contagious. It's also transformative. This week there was an article in the Times about the survivors of the Star Ballroom. If you remember the horrible shooting down in Monterey Park outside of LA earlier, where a gunman came in and killed 10 people, injuring several others. And the gunman then went to the Lai Lai Ballroom, but thankfully was disarmed before he had the opportunity to shoot anyone else. And the article talked about how members of that ballroom, in the wake of this tragedy, have slowly, tearfully, but intentionally begun to return in order to find celebration again in their dance. The article says, people would speak of the need to be here, for the release it might give their troubled minds, and there would be the belief, a wish, that dancing could still mean something good. No one would want to forget what happened, but everyone would hope it was possible to recognize all that was here before, that maybe joy could find its way to them again. Friends, no matter where we are in life, even in the most painful and troubling times, there is always something to celebrate. And to do so is the bravest and most courageous thing that we can do. As we talked about earlier, this Tuesday is Mardi Gras, or the day before the start of Lent. And the idea is, get your fun in while you can, because Wednesday you turn to dust and the party's over. That's the theological perspective. Now, I'm about to say something that a couple of hundred years ago would probably have gotten me burned at the stake. But life is short, so I'm just going to say it. I think we should change how we think about Lent. Oz and I have been talking about it this week, and given where we all are right now, coming out of COVID, bone-tired, mentally drained, spiritually thirsty, rather than being a pause to mark grief and sacrifice this year, we'd like to suggest that we use those 40 days as a pause to celebrate anticipation, to celebrate hope, to celebrate faith in the transformation yet to come on Easter Sunday morning, so that we can return to God's work on Monday morning. Every day throughout Lent, we should celebrate something. Maybe it's just something as simple as we woke up and we're having scrambled eggs. Or maybe it's that we did laundry the night before and we actually have clean clothes. It doesn't matter. It's the act of celebrating hope and faith and joy. As our offering says, we're not alone. Maybe our celebration is that marking ourselves in a place of pain, but knowing we are not alone in that pain. That may be the most powerful celebration we can do. Whatever it is, we should use every one of these 40 days to get primed for grace, equipped for grace, ready for grace. I want us to use this time to celebrate and be transformed by God's grace so that we can walk back down that mountain and with strength and courage and vision, take the road God has given us to do the work that needs to be done. Reverend Stephen Charleston, who is a Choctaw elder and a retired Episcopal bishop, perhaps said it best, and I'll leave you with these words. It's not for me to tell you who you are, but let me just share this small insight. You were born to be an agent of grace, sharing kindness into the world. You are an unconscious healer, restoring hope into the world. These two simple definitions are a spiritual job description. They represent the core of your calling. I believe they describe all of us, uniting us together into a shared purpose and a common task to be agents of grace and sources of hope. And the people said, Amen.